You know how some people say, "Don't mess with nature, it always wins." Well, let me tell you, that phrase became more than just a saying for me. It became the very backbone of the craziest HOA story I've ever lived through, and one I'll probably be telling for the rest of my life. I live in a quiet little neighborhood that, on the surface, looks like something straight out of a postcard. We've got tidy lawns, kids riding bikes up and down the street, and neighbors who wave to you when you're walking the dog. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, we've also got one of the strictest HOAs you can imagine, with rules about everything from mailbox color to the height of your grass. And, of course, we have our resident villain, Karen. Now, I didn't start off having any problems with Karen. Honestly, I never went looking for trouble. I kept to myself, paid my dues, and enjoyed my home. My property has one special feature that I love more than anything else, a little creek that runs through the back. It's not huge, just a winding stream with some rocks, plants, and a family of frogs that moved in years ago. The sound of the water trickling has always been my escape from the chaos of life. To me, it's what makes my house a home. But to Karen, apparently, my creek was nothing but a nuisance. The first time she ever mentioned it to me was at an HOA meeting. She stood up, arms crossed, hair cut into that famous "I want to speak to the manager, Bob," she said. "The creek behind Lot 17 is an eyesore. It's a breeding ground for mosquitoes, and it brings down property values." Lot 17. That was me. I remember sitting there, stunned. I wanted to raise my hand and argue back, but I figured it was better not to make enemies. The HOA president, who is usually spineless when it comes to Karen's complaints, just nodded along and said they'd look into it. I brushed it off. How could anyone call a peaceful little stream an eyesore? But that was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen started her campaign against my creek. She'd walk by my house, stop at the edge of the backyard, and snap photos with her phone. I caught her once, crouching down by the water like she was gathering evidence for some big investigation. I asked her what she was doing, and she gave me this smug little smile. "Documenting violations," she said. Violations of what? The creek had been there long before either of us bought homes in the neighborhood. It was part of the natural landscape, but Karen didn't care about that. To her, anything she didn't like was automatically a violation. Things escalated fast. One morning, I got a letter from the HOA claiming that my creek was causing erosion issues and presenting a hazard to the community. They wanted me to remediate the issue at my own expense, and if I didn't, I'd face daily fines. I couldn't believe it. They were asking me to somehow fix nature. It's not like I built the creek with my own two hands. It had been running through that land for decades. Probably longer. I went to the next HOA meeting armed with photos, maps, and even a statement from the county's environmental office, confirming that the creek was perfectly natural and not causing any hazards. I thought that would shut the whole thing down, but I underestimated Karen. When I stood up to speak, she interrupted me, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is a neighborhood, not a swamp. If you can't take responsibility for your property, maybe you don't belong here." The room went quiet. Everyone knew she was out of line, but nobody said a word. That was the power Karen held. She thrived on intimidation. The HOA tabled the issue that night. I could feel the storm brewing. And then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery in my backyard. At first, I thought it was just a garbage truck or maybe some roadwork nearby. But when I looked out the window, my heart nearly stopped. There was a cement truck parked right by my property line, and men in hard hats were dragging hoses down toward my creek. I ran outside, yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" One of the workers shrugged. "We've got orders to fill in this ditch. HOA's request, ditch." My creek wasn't a ditch. It was a living, breathing part of the land. And Karen, of course, was standing on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching the whole thing like a queen overseeing her subjects. "You can't do this," I shouted. "This is my property." She smirked. The HOA voted. "It's a safety issue. Consider it resolved." I tried to stop them, but the crew already had cement pouring down the slope. Thick and gray, smothering the rocks and plants I had taken care of for years. The frogs leaped for their lives as the water slowed, choked, and then stopped altogether. I felt sick, furious, powerless. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the hardened gray scar that had once been my beautiful creek. I thought about calling the cops, but Karen had framed it as an HOA project. I needed evidence. I needed to play it smart. What I didn't know then was that I wouldn't need to lift a finger. Nature was about to fight back on my behalf. The rains came a week later. Not just a drizzle, but one of those heavy summer storms where the sky seems to split open. Normally, my creek would have carried all that water away, letting it flow harmlessly through the neighborhood. But now it was blocked. The water had nowhere to go. At first, it pooled in my backyard, creeping toward my deck. I was about to panic, thinking I was about to lose everything, when I noticed something strange. The water wasn't staying in. My yard was diverting, seeping underground, flowing somewhere else the next morning. I found out exactly where. Karen's basement. I woke up to shouting outside and saw a group of neighbors gathered in front of Karen's house. I walked over, and that's when I saw it. Her basement windows were underwater. Actual fish were swimming past the glass. The water table had shifted, and everything Karen had tried to kill in my creek had found its way right into her home. Her basement had literally turned into a giant fish tank. Karen was on her lawn, screaming at contractors, HOA board members, anyone who would listen, but nobody could fix it. The cement she'd poured into my creek had completely rerouted the natural flow of water, and now her house was the low point where everything collected. It was poetic, beautiful even. I didn't say a word that day. I didn't have to. Everyone saw the karma unfold with their own eyes, but that was only the beginning. Because while Karen's basement filled with water and the HOA scrambled to cover their tracks, I was already planning my next move. I had evidence. I had the law on my side. And I was about to teach them all a lesson they would never forget. And trust me, the story only gets crazier from here. After the storm, word spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened to Karen's basement. You couldn't keep something like that quiet. Not when fish were literally swimming past her basement. Windows? It became the talk of the block, and for once, Karen wasn't the one controlling the narrative. I remember walking my dog the morning after, and nearly every neighbor I passed gave me a knowing smile, like we were all sharing the same inside joke. One guy even muttered, "Karma's a creek, huh?" under his breath, and I had to bite back a laugh. But Karen? Oh, she wasn't laughing, fuming. She stormed around the neighborhood in her rubber boots, shouting at anyone who would listen. She blamed me, of course, claimed that I had sabotaged her property somehow, that I had diverted the water on purpose. The audacity of that woman! It was like she couldn't comprehend that her own actions had led to this mess. The HOA board tried to back her up at first. At the emergency meeting they called, the president cleared his throat nervously and said, "We need to address the flooding issue at Lot 12. That was Karen's house." I raised my hand slowly. "Oh, you mean the flooding that only happened because you all illegally poured cement into my creek?" The room went silent. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. That creek was a violation, she snapped. It was dangerous. I pulled out the folder I'd been building ever since the first letter they've sent me. County Environmental Report, dated photos, even a copy of the HOA's own charter that explicitly said they had no authority to alter natural features on private property without owner consent. I laid it all out on the table, one page after another, like I was dealing cards in a poker game. "You want to talk about violations?" I said. "Let's talk about how you violated state environmental laws by dumping cement into a natural waterway, or how you trespassed on my property without permission, or how you spent HOA funds on an unauthorized project." The president's jaw practically hit the floor. A couple of the other board members looked like they wanted to disappear under the table talk. Karen tried to shout me down, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew the truth now. The HOA had overstepped, and Karen had dragged them all into a mess they couldn't wiggle out of. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew the HOA would try to cover its tracks. That's what organizations like that do. They protect themselves first, no matter who gets hurt in the process. So I decided to take things a step further. The next day, I made some phone calls. First, to the county environmental agency. I reported the cement dumping, gave them copies of my evidence, and told them about the flooding at Karen's house. Agent on the phone didn't even try to hide his shock. "They poured cement into a creek," he repeated. Wow. That's not just a violation. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Then I called a lawyer. I wasn't about to let the HOA sweep this under the rug. I wanted accountability. I wanted restitution. And honestly, I wanted Karen to pay for what she'd done. Meanwhile, Karen's situation went from bad to worse. The storm hadn't been a one-time fluke. Rain kept coming over the next few weeks, and every time it did, her basement turned into a swimming pool. She tried pumping the water out, but it just came back. Contractors told her the only solution was to remove the cement blocking the creek and restore the natural flow. The problem was, that wasn't a quick fix. It was expensive, complicated, and required permits she didn't have. And here's the kicker: the HOA's insurance wouldn't cover a dime of it. Because technically, what they did was illegal. I can't lie, took a certain amount of satisfaction watching Karen flounder. For years, she'd been the tyrant of the neighborhood, handing out violation notices like candy, barking orders at board meetings, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to cross her. Now, she was the one drowning literally. But the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger. Nature had done all the heavy lifting for me. Still, I wasn't content just to watch. I wanted to make sure justice was served. So I filed an official complaint with the county. I submitted all my evidence, plus photos of Karen's flooded basement that had been floating around in the neighborhood group chat. I knew those pictures would seal the deal. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, a county inspector showed up. He walked the property lines, took his own photos, and asked me questions about what had happened. When I told him the whole story, he shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Karen tried to intervene, of course. She marched out of her house in her rain boots, waving her arms and yelling about how I was lying, how I had somehow orchestrated the entire thing. The inspector just held up a hand and said, "Ma'am, please, I've seen enough." A few days later, the county issued their report. And let me tell you, it was brutal. Not only did they order the HOA to remove every bit of cement from my creek, but they also slapped them with thousands of dollars in fines for violating environmental regulations. And here's the best part. They named Karen personally responsible, since she was the one who initiated the whole mess. When I read that report, I couldn't help but laugh. It was the sweetest kind of vindication. But the story doesn't end there. Because once the county got involved, the situation spiraled into a full-blown legal battle that shook the entire neighborhood. And that's when things really got interesting. By the time the county report came down, the HOA board was in absolute chaos. You could almost hear the panic in their voices when they sent out an emergency email to all residents, claiming there had been a misunderstanding and that they were working with authorities to resolve the situation. A misunderstanding. They had literally hired a cement truck to fill in my creek. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was sabotage. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Everyone showed up, partly because they were sick of Karen running the show, and partly because, well, nobody wanted to miss the drama. People had lawn chairs, snacks, even coolers. It felt less like a meeting and more like a front row seat too. The neighborhood's biggest showdown. When I walked in, I could feel the energy shift. Normally, I'd sit in the back, quietly minding my own business. But this time, folks were patting me on the back, whispering things like, "Glad you're here, man," and give it to them. Karen sat at the front with her arms folded, trying to look composed, but her eye was twitching, and every time someone glanced her way, she glared back like she was daring them to speak. The president cleared his throat and started with the usual script about community, unity, and moving forward together. But before he could get too far, I stood up. "I have a question," I said, holding up the county's report. "When exactly did this board decide it had the legal authority to alter a natural waterway without notifying the homeowner, or the county, or anyone with half a brain, for that matter?" Murmurs spread through the room. The president shifted. In his seat, Karen slammed her hand on the table. "He's lying," she shouted. "This is all a setup. He wanted this to happen." I raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying I wanted you to spend HOA money on a cement truck, illegally dump it into my creek, ruin your own basement, and then get slapped with fines? That was my master plan." The laughter that erupted was instant. Even the board members couldn't hold it in. Karen's face turned crimson. That was the moment the tide turned. For years, Karen had ruled with fear. People went along with her because it was easier than fighting back. But now, with the evidence stacked against her, the spell was broken. One by one, neighbors started speaking up. "You fined me for planting sunflowers in my yard? You threatened to tow my car because I parked in my own driveway. You tried to make me tear down my kid's treehouse." It was like a dam bursting. All the pent-up frustration came pouring out, and for the first time, Karen didn't have the power to shut it down. The board tried to calm things, but it was useless. People were demanding answers, demanding accountability. And when I pointed out that the county's fines weren't just against the HOA, but also Karen personally, the room erupted again. She tried to fight back, but she was drowning. And not just in water, this time she was drowning in her own arrogance. After the meeting, I knew I had them right where I wanted them. That's when I sat down with my lawyer to discuss next steps. Now, I'll be honest with you, lawsuits aren't cheap, and they're not fun. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle. Karen and the HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them walk away without consequences. So we filed a full lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress, and against Karen personally for harassment and abuse of power. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some folks were nervous, worried about what it would mean for their dues if the HOA lost in court, but most were thrilled. Finally, someone was standing up to the monster they'd all been living under for years. Meanwhile, Karen's basement was still a swamp. She'd spent thousands on pumps, dehumidifiers, and contractors, but it didn't matter. Every time it rained, the water came back. The only real fix was to undo the damage she'd caused, but by then, the county had taken over. They had their own contractors come in, tearing out the cement and restoring the creek to its natural flow. When the water started running again, it was like life breathed back into my property. The frogs came back. The plants started regrowing. The sound of the water returned, and with it, My peace of mind, Karen, on the other hand, was left with a gutted basement, a destroyed reputation, and a mountain of legal trouble. But here's the twist: just when I thought the battle was over, it turned out Karen wasn't done yet. No, she had one more trick up her sleeve. And it was the most desperate move she'd ever made. And that's when things really took a turn none of us expected. When most people hit rock bottom, they stop digging. But not Karen. No, she grabbed a bigger shovel and doubled down. After the county forced the HOA to restore my creek, I thought that would be the end of it. The water was flowing again. The frogs had returned, and for the first time in months, I could sit on my porch and feel at peace. But Karen, she wasn't ready to accept defeat. In her mind, she was still the queen of the neighborhood, and I was the enemy who needed to be destroyed. It started with whispers. Neighbors would tell me Karen was going door to door, spreading rumors. She claimed my creek was contaminated, that it was polluting the groundwater, that I had somehow rigged the county into siding with me. She painted herself as the victim, the poor homeowner whose basement had been ruined because of my selfishness. At first, I ignored it. Anyone with eyes could see the truth. But then she escalated. One evening, I came home to find a giant sign staked in her front yard. In bold black letters, it read, "Protect our neighborhoods, stop the creek menace underneath." She had listed a bunch of nonsense bullet points about disease, flooding, and property values. She even printed little flyers and stuffed them in everyone's mailboxes. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. But here's where things got truly insane. She tried to get a petition going to have the creek permanently diverted underground. That's right, she wanted to pay for massive construction work to bury a natural waterway in pipes. All because she couldn't stand losing to me. The HOA board, already battered and bruised from the fines and lawsuits, wanted nothing to do with it. The president looked exhausted at the next meeting. "We cannot approve this," he said firmly. "We're already facing financial ruin. We can't take on another project." Karen exploded. She pounded the table, her voice rising into a screech. "If you don't act, then I'll do it myself. This neighborhood is in danger, and nobody has the guts to do what's necessary." The room was dead silent. You could practically hear the collective thought, "She's lost it." But, true to her word, she did try. A week later, I caught contractors snooping around my property again. When I confronted them, they admitted Karen had contacted them about drainage solutions. I told them in no uncertain terms that if they stepped 1 foot on my land, I'd have them arrested for trespassing. They backed off immediately. But Karen, oh, she didn't. Single quotes, the very next morning, she called the county to report me for creating a public health hazard. I only found out because an inspector showed up at 2 at my door again. He looked embarrassed, apologized, and said, "We got another complaint. I'm just here to check the box." He walked the property, tested the water, and left shaking his head. "This is cleaner than half the drinking water systems I test," he muttered. "This woman's wasting everybody's time." Strike 2. For Karen. And then came the big one, her last desperate scheme. Karen decided to take me to civil court. She actually filed her own lawsuit against me, claiming that my creek was responsible for the flooding in her basement and that I should be held financially liable for the damages. When my lawyer told me, I nearly fell out of my chair laughing. The irony was too much. She had destroyed my creek, rerouted the water, flooded her own house, been fined by the county, and now she wanted to sue me. Fine, I thought. Let's do this. The court date came, and I'll never forget the scene. Karen strutted in with stacks of papers, her hair sprayed to perfection, looking like she was ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. She glared at me across the room, convinced she was finally going to win. The judge, however, wasn't impressed, Karen launched into a long rant about how my reckless negligence had caused her basement to flood. She waved around photos of the damage, pointed at me dramatically, and even started crying halfway through her speech. When it was my turn, I calmly handed over the county's report, the environmental studies, the photos of her supervising the cement truck, the letters from the HOA threatening me, the inspector's notes about her bogus complaints. The judge flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising higher and higher. Then, he looked at Karen. "Ms. Johnson," he said slowly, "you're suing your neighbor for damage that you yourself caused." Karen stammered, tried to interrupt, tried to spin the story, but the judge shut her down. "Case dismissed," he said, firmly, "and frankly, you're lucky the defendant hasn't filed additional charges against you." I almost did, but honestly, watching her storm out of that courtroom, red-faced and sputtering, was satisfaction enough. By then, the HOA was crumbling. Members were resigning left and right. The president announced he was stepping down, saying he wanted no part in the circus. The neighborhood started talking about dissolving the HOA altogether, tired of the drama and the endless fees. And Karen, well, she had become the neighborhood pariah. People avoided her. Some crossed the street when they saw her coming. The once feared HOA queen was now just the lady with the flooded basement and a ruined reputation. I could have left it at that. But I had one more card to play, one final move that would make sure Karen and her cronies never pulled something like this again. And trust me, that finale was worth every second. By the time Karen's lawsuit against me was laughed out of court, the HOA was hanging by a thread. Meetings that used to be tense power plays turned into empty gatherings, with just a handful of exhausted board members who clearly wished they'd never signed up in the first place. The neighborhood itself was changing too. People who had once been silent started speaking up. They weren't just upset about my creek anymore. They were tired of the endless harassment, the nitpicky fines, the constant sense that Big Brother, or in this case, Big Karen, was watching their every move. The resentment had been building for years, and Karen's cement stunt had finally lit the match. One Saturday, a group of neighbors organized a backyard barbecue, not at the clubhouse, not under HOA rules, but in someone's private yard. No one asked permission. No one filed paperwork. We just gathered, ate burgers, drank beer, and laughed like we hadn't in years. And you know what? It felt good. Free, like we were taking our neighborhood back from the tyranny of the HOA. Karen, of course, tried to crash the party. She stormed down the sidewalk, shouting about permits and noise violations. But instead of cowering, people just ignored her. She yelled until she was red in the face, but no one even bothered to argue anymore. Eventually, she stomped back home, defeated. That was the real turning point. A few weeks later, someone started a petition, not one of Karen's fake ones, but a real, neighborhood-wide effort to dissolve the HOA. It didn't take long to gather signatures. People were done. They wanted their freedom back. They wanted their neighborhood to be a community again, not a dictatorship. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. The HOA was officially dissolved. Just like that, years of petty fines, power trips, and Karen's reign of terror came to an end. The look on her face that day, priceless. As for Karen, she tried to hold on to her little kingdom. But with no board, no authority, and no backing, she was just another homeowner with a soggy basement. Rumor has it she eventually put her house up for sale. Who knows where she went after that, but I can tell you one thing. She didn't leave behind a single friend. And me. Well, I got my creek back. The county finished restoring it, and nature wasted no time reclaiming its home. Fish swam through the clear water again. Frogs sang at night. Dragonflies hovered over the surface in the summer sun. My backyard felt alive again, peaceful, like it was always meant to be. Sometimes I sit on my porch, listening to the water trickle, and I think about everything that happened. The chaos, the meetings, the cement truck, the fish swimming in Karen's basement. And I can't help but smile, because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about me versus Karen. It was about standing up to bullies. It was about protecting what matters, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. And it was about karma, sweet, poetic karma that reminded everyone you can't fight nature. And you sure as hell can't fight the truth. So if you ever find yourself up against a Karen or an HOA, or anyone who thinks they can control you with fear, remember this: sometimes the best revenge isn't something you do. Sometimes you just sit back, let the creek flow, and watch as nature and justice do the work for you. And in my case, let's just say the sound of running water has never been sweeter.